go then. Another, I was going to say another State of the Union, George. My head's already full with the news of the day. Another episode, BHN, live streaming to every live streaming platform that you can. Thanks for joining us. Morning, George.
Good morning. Beautiful Dunedin day.
Beautiful Dunedin day. In fact, we're both in Dunedin, yet we're both in remote because of COVID at the moment.
Yeah, very safe. The university was very quiet yesterday. I mean, it is the first week of lectures there, but I was surprised by the lack of people. Well, maybe not surprised, I don't know. But yeah, bit of first-hand reporting there, lack of people on campus.
You do a role there where you're a lecturer or a tutor and stuff as well. So are you saying that the lecture halls, etc., were a bit empty?
Yeah, so I had my first workshop that I do for the journalism course I teach. I went into the business school, and it seemed like we were the only class there. And again, it is the first week of lectures. On Tuesday, we have to provide a Zoom workshop for people isolating, and in my class of about 100 people, we had 10 people or 11 people in that one. So about 10% with COVID, it seemed like. And then just in our class, trying to keep away from each other. Trying to uphold the university's policy of wearing a mask at all times. I'm a bit more of a lax guy about that when it comes to me being in a room by myself. But yeah, it's going to be a one to navigate, I think.
I read a story yesterday, and it seems, and maybe you're seeing this at the university, but it seems that in the residency halls and the colleges and stuff around Dunedin, and for people who don't understand the Dunedin culture at university, because I didn't go to university down here, so I didn't quite get it. When people talk about a college, they're talking about dorms where students live. Like when I used to think about a college, I thought about a high school. But in Dunedin, when they talk about the colleges, they're talking about, the residents where the students, primarily first years, come to from out of Dunedin to live. And the colleges, the headlines are saying, the stories are saying, are basically full of COVID, and headlines like students don't know anybody of their classmates who doesn't have COVID right now. So that's probably why you're empty. Is everything remote? So everything's going remotely from the university? So like when you do a lecture and stuff, it's all zoomed out live, or do you record it and it gets uploaded?
So lectures are remote, and then these workshops or tutorials or whatever they are, we do have in-person ones because it would only be about 10 people. And I'm glad that it's like that. Just a couple of lockdowns of Zoom teaching was exhausting. And with what I'm teaching, it's very difficult to do it on Zoom. You kind of need to be with the people. They need to, be engaged, and you need to be able to see their work, their written work, and teach them how to use audio software, and all of that. That is just a lot easier now that we can be in person. So I'm really happy that the university has done that, but still allowing us to have an extra Zoom one if people are in isolation.
Cool, man. Well, listen, a huge 24 hours of news in New Zealand, especially around Wellington. Today's show, we are going to be covering off what happened yesterday. We are going to be crossing live to Ukraine. So when I say live, we spoke to Tom Mutch about 45 minutes ago, but we spoke to him. He is live in the Ukraine. That's what I'm saying. And we'll be going and having a chat about that. And then, George, we're going to have a look at what happened in the US yesterday with the State of the Union, because as they say, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. It's a bit of an appropriate analogy during times of COVID, but it's something to keep an eye on, and something we will keep an eye on. So we'll have a bit of a look at what it's President Trump, isn't it now, or is it still Biden? Has he gone? No, okay. President Biden's State of the Union, and we'll see what he had to say, because to be honest, it sort of looked like business as usual. In other words, there was a couple of lunatics, Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, but other than them from the Republican side, it looked like sort of a president making a speech. And whilst there was a couple of boos, like, for example, when Biden talked about the previous tax cut was for the 1%, there was a bit of a about that. But in general, it looked like business as usual for the State of the Union, which has been very different from the previous administration. So, but we'll have a closer look towards the end of the hour for that. And it's probably a good time to jump into talking about the events of yesterday and what happened. What we're looking at right now actually is a live feed. So this is live. I noticed as well for the first time that you see down here, it says this is the New Zealand Herald. The chat is disabled on this live stream. I wonder why. I wonder the kind of comments that would be going on in the chat of the live stream of the protest. But this is the live stream right now that we're looking at. The trucks have come in and they're picking up what is arguably molten mess of tents and refuse to finally clear those grounds. And I think what we're going to do is go through a few things that we saw yesterday, and I think we're going to have a look at what the police commissioner said today, and just get some thoughts around it. Remember, if you're watching us or if you're with us, you can always join in. If you text a message on the platform you're watching us on, it comes through to us in the system we're using, and sometimes we share them on the actual show. Would love to hear your thoughts, and especially if you've got any comments around what happened yesterday. It would be interesting to get your thoughts. I mean, was it one side is saying that it's the worst day in New Zealand history, and the Nazi police have proven themselves now. The other saying, thank goodness democracy is coming back to what it should be. I noticed also yesterday there was a scene where a whole bunch of the residents who lived around Parliament were out on their balconies clapping when the police finally cleared the area of something. So there are some who are happy about this, even if you hear from the protesters themselves that they think they're representing New Zealand. I heard in the protest yesterday someone say something like, New Zealand police, you're fighting against the will of the New Zealand people. And I was like, might be a bit of a stretch. Before we jump into it, George, you got anything to... I watched the whole thing. I was glued to my screen yesterday. I had TikTok going on this, and I had the live feeds going on the screen, and I was sending... Apparently, at times I was sending live TikToks to the big screen, and me and my kids were watching it. So I was kind of glued to the screen while it was all going on. Did you check it out? Have you got anything to add for it?
Yeah, I guess it seemed inevitable in a way. I guess this is a sort of protest group that you wouldn't be able to negotiate with, right? I guess we're used to protest groups with a fair amount of leadership that can be negotiated with. I guess we're used to protest groups that actually have demands based in reality, or at least demands that, demands.
Full stop. Full stop after the word demands.
Yeah, rather than vague sentiments about freedom. And now, like, I'm much more than the mainstream, a bit sympathetic to some of the people that were there and this sort of thing, but I do feel like, ultimatums were given, and I guess something like this was inevitable. I'm always careful to be gung-ho about supporting the police in any capacity. I always sort of separate myself from that, and I'm not going to sit there and cheer when the police are pepper spraying anyone. But nonetheless, I do feel like just objectively this was inevitable.
It did feel to me that the police were remarkably restrained. I think you'll see, we've got a clip coming up shortly from the AM show this morning where the police commissioner says, and we'll take him at his word until proven otherwise, says that no batons were brandished, for example. So you think about, I mean, those of us who can remember it, or those of us who have seen it on film, you think about looking back to the 1981 Springbok tour, plenty of batons brandished there. Think about Bastion Point, plenty of batons. So they've cleared this space. There was some pushing and shoving, without question, but without brandishing a baton, I think, if nothing else, they got to be, there's at least one tick in there. Let's give them some credit box. Not saying it's 100% all one way, but at least there's one tick. So we'll get to the commissioner in a second. In fact, why don't we get to some of these clips now? The first thing to probably do, and I'm sure most of us have seen what's been going on, is to have a look at the initial report of basically what happened and what went on through yesterday.
A standoff never seen before at Parliament. At dawn, hundreds of police moved in on the occupation that's stretched into its 4th week, and they came prepared. A helicopter, heavy-duty forklifts, trucks and pepper spray to disperse the crowd. Protesters washing their eyes with milk and striking back at officers with a fire extinguisher and paint.
Early on, we saw weapons, we saw shields, we saw barricades.
One by one, tents were dismantled and parked cars that had been left for weeks were removed. Metre by metre, police edging forward, reclaiming the streets. A welcome sight for those affected by weeks of disruption, but many protesters are convinced they are the victims.
These terrorist goon thugs, these rent-a-cops, they're wanted for war crimes.
Some in the crowd claimed police brutality, pointing to officers punching protesters.
What I have seen myself, I am very happy with. I think our staff have been extremely patient and extremely restrained.
But any impression of peace and rationality on the protesters' side is increasingly hard to maintain.
Our forefathers have fought for this land, and you don't ride roughshod over it because some girl in a skirt is on a power trip.
Man, I have to say that comment there, some girl in a skirt, that talking about the Prime Minister, you know, I get that we can not particularly enjoy a political perspective or a party, but there is that old adage of respecting the office of the Prime Minister, and I don't know if you're the same, George, but for me it's like when people get to a point where they've gone to those kinds of arguments, they've completely lost me. You know, so show us the data, show us the facts, offer your opinion, that's fine, but you know, some girl in a skirt, it's just so disrespectful. I mean, I'm not a prude, and I don't mind criticizing governments and government and individual members of parliament. That's fine, but you know, I just think that says the whole. Well, it's no deeper than that.
As one of Sean Hawkins from the YouTube chat says, childish, privileged, selfish adults who don't want to cover their mouth when they cough. I mean, pretty sums up that specific dude there. And talking about
what about someone said yesterday? But what about was it Chewy who was with us yesterday saying that he knows people living in that area and they've seen the protesters doing things like spitting on the crosswalk buttons. So it's not even just not wanting to cover their mouth. This is a report, so I guess we got to say allegedly, but actively going, you know, and either going, if I've got it, you're going to get it, or going, I don't believe in it. So either way, it's just repulsive. It was repulsive.
Yeah. And in the Prime Minister's address yesterday, just before the 6 o'clock news, she mentioned something, this line she's mentioned a few times of this importedness of this protest. And we also saw that in that guy's comments there. Our forefathers have fought for this land, right? This very American language. You saw on his jacket as well, it said common law sheriff, right? This sort of American libertarian flavor that has been imported into this protest. And I do sort of agree with the Prime Minister there. Sometimes I think maybe she is sort of distracting from the point that maybe these protests are full of like disenfranchised people that I mean she did bring this up as well, that this is just like the latest conspiracy that disenfranchised people are latching on to, right? And sometime in the future, I don't know if you want to play this from the Prime Minister that I've got here.
Share your screen.
Yeah.
Sharing your screen. Done.
And to help care for our most vulnerable. One day it will be our job to try and understand how a group of people could succumb to such wild and dangerous mis and disinformation. And while many of us have seen that disinformation and dismissed it as conspiracy theory, a small portion of our society have not only believed it, they have acted upon it in an extreme and violent way that cannot stand. We have a difficult journey in front of us to address the underlying cause of what we have seen here today. But in doing so, we will never, ever excuse it. It was an attack on our frontline police. It was an attack on our parliament. It was an attack on our values, and it was wrong. And the reason it would have shaken so many to witness it is because it stands so completely against not just our response to COVID, but who we are as people. But we will not be defined by this. This pandemic will not be defined by the hard conversations we've all had these past few years. Our people will not be defined by a small handful of protesters. Our country will not be defined by the dismantling of an occupation. In fact, when we look back at this period in our history, I hope we remember one thing. Together, thousands more lives were saved over the past 2 years by your actions as New Zealanders than were on that front lawn of Parliament today.
Yeah, so overall, Jacinda's speech, it had these elements of strong law and order, strong like pro-police and this sort of thing. But she is walking a line in that she's like trying to positivize this, right? She's trying to not get distracted by those scenes on Parliament lawn, trying to remember the good days of the New Zealand team of whatever it is, how many million we have, this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it was a good message. I watched that live at 5:30 last night as well, because she was very much about we're done. I still think we've said this before in the show this week, as well as I think the protesters missed a beat when the Prime Minister made very clear we're not going to meet with you, and there's good reason for that. Like, imagine if that became common practice. All of a sudden, every single group with some kind of complaint would end up trying to take Parliament hostage to meet with the leaders. So that they were never going to meet with them. That was the first thing. But I think the Prime Minister signaled to them when she said in one of her press conferences, "You have been heard. We have heard your message."
Yeah.
So they're not going to get any more than that from an official leadership. But also, you talked before about how this ended. Like on day 3, I don't know if I said it publicly, but I certainly was saying is that was always going to end this way. No matter what, it was always going to have to be forcibly removed, because the government was never going to end the mandate because, of Camp COVID. And Camp COVID was never going to leave until the mandate was ended, thanks to them.
I don't think they would have left even then.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But so this was always going to end this way. And then, as people within the camp were saying, different factions and stuff were even coming in up until the weekend just gone. Even if, say, the mandate did end, as you say, then what happens when the next complaint and that camp gets used to further the next complaint, whatever that next complaint is? It's been a difficult one for me on some levels, because I really believe in protest. And I don't have a problem with public disorder and that kind of thing for protest. And I guess I've kind of checked myself before I wrecked myself a few times by thinking, what's different about this? And for example, an iwi setting up a protest on a land that was taken from them by the Crown and not returned, right? And if that's a genuine iwi claim, I would pretty much support that without question. So I kind of go, what's different about this? And I kind of come back to the idea that it's all the misinformation and disinformation. But then I kind of expand it and I go, but people are allowed to be wrong. But then the being wrong seems to be weaponized. So it seems purposefully nefarious. It seems like that there are grifters mixed in amongst them who are making names or money for themselves. I mean, there is a media group who asked for a media truck completely kitted out as a part of this. So yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to, can you have your cake and eat it too? Can you actually support protest, support public dissent, and also go, but not this time? And I think you probably can. And I think that's probably why my head's going. I feel a little bit conflicted, because I'm completely against their sentiment and their actions, but I'm someone who does support protest and public dissent in general.
Yeah, I think it seemed to be largely their behaviour, the disunity as well, not having a clear message from one protester to another. I think they could have done a better job there. But I think that was indicative of really what the sort of contradictory nature of it, right? That they would be like, they'd yell at Jacinda, why aren't you talking to us? But at the same time, tell her to fuck off and get away from our children and all this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And as for the right to protest, and sorry, getting ahead of ourselves here, but I think Marama Davidson mentioned this in Parliament, is that in the long term, and just Ardern sort of noted at this, we have to sort of be careful that this event isn't used as an excuse to not only get rid of other protests, but sort of like demean them and sort of talk down to other protests in the future, right? And that's exactly, I mean, how this sort of thing works. This language will get redeployed at some stage against, other protests.
Yeah, Marama and all of the politicians seem to be united in the idea also of, because the question is now where to from here, especially with Parliament grounds. Does it become the White House and does it get locked up or not? And so they all kind of said in one voice, we don't want to see that happen. Here's an example of that.
It is the people's house. It is the people's lawn. And we have said that so many times on the steps of many protests. Welcome to Parliament. But the thing is, it's here for everyone.
This is a precedent-setting event that changes us.
It would be a tragedy to make our Parliament less accessible because this particular issue has been badly handled.
But it is still a question to be asked, where to from here. And I think probably what we might see, and just an opinion, is they might close down Parliament grounds for a couple of months, whether they need to have an excuse or not. I mean, the excuse can be, well, we need to reseed the lawns, we need to rebuild the playground, we need to fix everything up. So whilst we're doing that, you can't enter. Wondering if that will give them enough space to actually, end mandates and let some of this die down, to hopefully not have them come back. But I guess right as we speak right now, there are protests in Auckland at the Domain, and this Wellington group could just get in their little COVID convoy and head to somewhere else and sit like in central Auckland and Epsom is the Governor General's house. They could just sit outside it. They could move elsewhere. Although I think the destroying of the tents hampered them a bit yesterday, because they were saying that these people are going to be now stuck on the streets. Many of them have now lost their cars because they were forklifted out of there, and they've lost their tents, and so they're going to be on the street. So maybe it won't be quite as simple for them to drive to another location. Let's play this next clip as well, because you were talking about we were talking about kind of supporting the idea of protest and supporting the idea of dissent, but feeling conflicted because kind of going, not this one. Marama Fox made some pretty big headlines yesterday. Her name was trending on Twitter because she was down there, and I think it sounds like maybe what she was saying is she was there to support her whānau, sort of going for their right to do what they were doing. Whether she did or didn't agree with them, I'm not 100% clear, but let's play this clip and see what what she says about that, along with some others as well, some other commentary from protesters who were there.
What's happened today is disgraceful. I have never seen that kind of wanton violence in this country since the South African protests.
Came over specifically to make sure we could get our whānau out who are still camped in there, and yes, till now haven't left, because they're exercising their right to go and say that this is not right.
As this mammoth operation stretched on, police moved from the streets to ground zero, Parliament lawns, making a push to clear the camp this afternoon, ripping down tents in full riot gear as desperate protesters mounted a final resistance. A blaze broke out across the camp. A day of confrontation and tension in the heart of the capital, with a clear message: the party's over.
Yeah, so there you go. So Marama Fox, I mean, no disrespect to her, but some would be. She's a bit unrecognisable when she's not in her MP gear from years gone by. I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds like she's anti-mandate but pro-whānau, supporting her people. It's a tough one. I had a conversation with someone yesterday talking about they've got friends in the anti-vaxxer world, and it's so hard because of the vitriol being thrown at her friends, wants her to protect her friends even though she's vaccinated, and that probably leads into the question of where to from here as a society. How do we, maybe it's more of a question for America because they seem more divided, but where do we go? How do we come back after this? Like the nation was divided in 81 over the Springboks. If we came back together after it, is that possible to come back together after this?
Well, maybe what we need to do is us to bring in someone like Marama Fox, but also as a nation bring in people like Marama Fox, and maybe separate the anti-mandate people from the anti-vaccine lizard brain people, right? And sort of bring now that we are questioning mandates. So there was a High Court decision on mandates for police officers and defense personnel the other day, which basically quashed mandates for police and defense personnel. Now that we're having these discussions and we're rethinking as we sort of figure out what the hell we're doing with Omicron, maybe we need to, and without legitimizing the violence, we still need to understand, and Ardern said this herself, we still need to understand these perspectives of these people, although she was more saying we need to understand why these people believed in conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. But yeah, a News Hub article said former MP Marama Fox, she spoke to News Hub, she's vaccinated, is anti-mandate, and she's been at the Parliament protests. She agrees some of the behaviour towards mana whenua hasn't been ideal, and she wants to bring both sides together. This is not a Māori protest, but Māori are affected by mandates. People have been disenfranchised. So yeah, I mean, at risk of legitimising the craziness of the protests, I still think there will be a friend of mine said to me, people should never be losing their jobs under a Labour government. A Labour government should be protecting people's jobs. And that's when I get uneasy, right? That's when I'm like, we need to be a bit kind of careful here with these sorts of things. So.
But then you do get into the chicken and egg conversation. Like I spoke to a teacher, end of last year, who was losing a job because of a mandate, who ironically I saw on the live stream today, I think at Parliament, coming back to Parliament to continue her belief about being anti-mandate. And I mean, without any disrespect to anyone who, if you don't take a vaccine, I actually don't care. That's on you. That's your personal body, your personal autonomy. But there is a way for people not to lose their job, and that's to get vaccinated. I mean, or to provide evidence as to why they cannot be. And that sounds really harsh, and I know that sounds really harsh, and I know for people who have done it because they have religious disagreements or they don't want to put it in their body or whatever, I come back to this idea that they are still ultimately, unless you medically can't have it, which is a very, very, very small percent, they're still ultimately misinformed, because the reason they say they don't want it in their body is from all those talking points from the misinformation and disinformation that we come back to. So I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not saying it's an easy solution. I'm saying it's today's solution, and tomorrow it might be different. And we all hope and pray that fucking a month from now or 2 months from now, it'll be different again. Let's have a look at some comments that were made this morning, because we still want to get to the Ukraine shortly and have a chat with Tom Mutch, who is live in the Ukraine for us. Let's have a look quickly, though, just to wrap this whole segment up, at what the police commissioner said this morning. He was asked about, and we all saw it when we just watched that footage, he was asked about the fires that started, and he was asked on the AM show if he knew how they started.
I can't speak to the fine detail of that. I've heard that theory, but what I saw very clearly was a number of people adding fuel to that fire, and that included gas bottles, it included petrol. And so we saw a number of explosions occurring in the mix of it. And then subsequent to that, we saw several fires deliberately lit. So without a doubt, there were people setting alight things there yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. But once it was going, it was all on for young and old, unfortunately, wasn't it? All right, so we've kind of contained the situation for now. Obviously, the cleanup will begin.
I think the next question we're going to jump to is he was then asked about when they made the decision to use force, and it's accurate that they used force, but I'd say it's pretty fair to also say they didn't use brutal force. So the police commissioner responded as to when they decided to, let's say, take the actions they took yesterday to finally clear out Parliament grounds.
So even yesterday, the force we used was well short of what you would expect to see in many places. I didn't see a baton used yesterday. We didn't deploy tear gas. We only lifted the levels of force when it was required to manage the crowd, and the restraint, professionalism, courage of our people. You won't see a finer example anywhere in the world. That said, we pursued a path of de-escalation from the point that I said publicly that was required. We reduced the number of people and vehicles. We got down to a small number of people who, in our assessment, were A, not going to move, and B, the balance in the crowd was shifting. It had moved from peaceful protest to, in our view, at least a hardcore who were spoiling for a fight, and we needed to fix that situation.
Yeah, and
so there you go. So they're claiming, making the case that I also think that they were given fair warning, and that's I sound like a bit of a blooming authoritarian saying that, don't I? But it seems I kind of feel like it was always going to end this way, and the police and those who were responsible for clearing the grounds sort of did everything they could, including allowing it to go into its 4th week, and then saying, just so you're all clear, you have 6 hours, we are coming in, we are going to do it. And they did it. And I just thought, for the final sort of clip about today, there's just a clip here from
fuck.
Okay, we've got some more talk, my voice over there from there as well. I did think this, and this, I'm not making light of this, because you can see this was part of the protest and how serious it was, but it is very Kiwi. It is very Kiwi to threaten something terrible and then not do it. It's like a vehicle version of, you want to go? You want to go?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
You want to go?
Yeah.
I'm not actually doing it.
He's going to hold me back, bro. Hold me back.
I'm not making light of this, but you can see, you can actually see, and look, let's give credit where both sides are due, that even though people are going to probably criticize me for this comment, the protesters on some level were restrained as well. I mean, if that person driving that car wasn't restrained, they would have just kept on going backwards. So there was, let's be fair and say there was instances on both sides where people were restrained. The police were restrained. No batons is what's reported. The person driving that car was restrained. It was a threat. It was a horrible threat, and probably actually criminal activity, that threat, but still didn't carry through on what could have been there as well. So I don't know. Give both sides a little bit of credit without trying to go one's bigger than the other.
He just wanted to have a little bit of a hoon, you know.
Yeah, interesting times. So we'll be interested to see what happens there for the next wee while. Plan a Walk makes a very obvious statement. When I say obvious, I mean we all should have done this gag. Plan a Walk, you got in there first. One thing I hear a lot is about the question of who started the fire. Police say protesters. Protesters say police. Tipped over a generator, and Billy Joel says we didn't start the fire. So it's fair, actually. So if we didn't start it, who did? I don't know. I mean, I was watching it. I watched the whole thing live, and I can say pretty unequivocally the protesters started the fire. The reason being, I haven't got it. I could go and find it, but maybe I will while we play out this interview, is that the police are in a line in the Parliament grounds. There is a row of tents in front of them, and the fire started behind it where the protesters were. The police weren't actually by the place where the fire started. There's also a little bit of false flag conversation going on at the moment. Watching a couple of live streams, the people saying, "Oh, I don't recognize any of these people throwing things on the fire. I think they've just turned up. I think they're operatives." That conversation is going around as now. But I unless there was like one police officer who was outside of all the other police, which is not how they operate, it seemed pretty obvious that the protesters started the fire. Now, I guess the question is, did they do it on purpose or not? Don't know. But that first fire, the police weren't, and there was a good 2 meters separating where the police were and where the fire started. So that seemed pretty obvious to me. Right, let's have a trip over to Ukraine now. New Zealand reporter Tom Mutch is in Ukraine. That it looks bizarre that we're seeing ourselves in multiple ways there, but that's kind of how it goes when we've done a pre-recorded interview. Don't worry, we'll remove me and George from this and turn our microphones off, so you won't hear us clicking and drinking and slurping in the background. But about an hour or so ago, we got a chance to catch up with Tom Mutch. Tom Mutch is in the Ukraine now, reporting from the Ukraine now, and he will be giving us an update on what's happening in the Ukraine. So Tom Mutch, live out of Ukraine. So welcome to the show, New Zealand journalist Tom Mutch. Tom is in Lviv in Ukraine, where we spoke to you the other day on Monday, our time, Tom, as well. So you were in a backpack as you were in that area. Is that still where you're located from day to day? You're in the same building, same location?
We moved to we moved apartment, but yeah, got a hotel room now, but so slightly nicer. But yeah, still basically the same sort of stuff. And most of the hostels and hotels here have actually changed to double as refugee kind of camps. You know, all the people that have been fleeing from eastern Ukraine, whether it's Donbass, whether it's Kiev, whether it's Kharkiv, most of them stay here now.
You talked about on Monday of potentially heading back east, obviously if it was safe enough to go to report. But I'm pretty sure I saw this morning, because I thought of you when I saw the city you're in, talking about some low-flying jets seen overhead. Is that correct? Have you seen that? And is that the Russian forces moving further west?
So it's not. I know what it is, and I unfortunately, because of like operational security reasons, I can't really go into too much detail. But they were Ukrainian, and there were a lot of them.
All right. Well, that's good to know, because we saw was a headline about low-flying jets. So that means you're safer than if it was Russian.
Yeah, exactly.
MiGs. What are you seeing? What have you seen over the last couple of days? I know you've been out, being a journalist and looking around and getting information. What can you update us on the last 48, 72 hours?
Okay, so from over here, what I've been mainly doing now is I've been mainly focusing on the refugee crisis on the border. As I said, this is one of the biggest refugee crises any country in Europe has had for about, since the Second World War. It threatens, people think there could be, up to 5 million refugees end up fleeing Ukraine, possibly even more. And so there have been these huge, big, long lines on the border. We're talking about lines that go for, they were going for like 30, 40 kilometers at one point. I know people who walked, for literally 15, 16 hours in a row to try and get to the front. And then once they got to the border, some of them were stuck there. We're talking like 2-3 days, absolutely freezing cold. It's snowing at the moment. It was just really, really horrible scenes there.
Hey, Tom, we were talking the other day about reports of some refugees not being allowed into Poland, especially Ukrainians of African descent, or there are reports of Indian students not being allowed on trains and this sort of thing. Is this something you can confirm or at least talk to?
I can confirm that definitely was the case at some point. I remember I had one particularly bad story. I spoke to a guy from Morocco. He said that one of his friends had been turned back, and actually some of the border guards had beaten him and they'd sent him to the back of the queue. So for a long time they had a rule that was basically women and children only, and the men, whether they were Ukrainian or foreigners, with the exception of like European foreigners, were not, or Americans or Western foreigners were not allowed to cross. And so there were guys. We met guys from Congo, we met guys from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, people who've been there, they were the ones who were really stuck there. Some of them were burning their clothes to keep warm. They had no proper shelter. They had no proper food supplies. So we bought them a bunch of food and blankets and stuff. However, I went back to that same border today, and it did seem like things had stabilized a little bit. The lines were much, much lesser. The place where they were camping out, that had been cleared, and apparently most of them have been let across the border. But we do hear there are other problems on borders, such as Romania and Hungary as well.
Which border, Tom, have you been? Is it the Polish border or the Moldova?
Yes, the Polish border. It's the Polish border. The majority, I think, probably about 50% of refugees have taken the route into Poland. The others are.
Hello.
I'm here.
Okay. Cool. Look, you're in a war zone. If the internet kind of cuts out a bit, we're okay with that. I wanted to know as well, Tom, obviously all the rest of the world is seeing headlines, and they're probably seeing the 1% of the best stories, the vitriolic, this is what's happening in Ukraine, and they're probably seeing 1% of the worst stories for what's happening with the impact and the buildings falling and the death. If you were to help us understand maybe more from on the ground what is happening, what don't we know that needs to be known that maybe is not in the media the world over right now?
So Look, one thing that I've been trying to get a little bit of attention to, this is quite a sad scenario, is a lot of people have heard about, the sort of the great military heroics. But what not a lot of people have heard about is what's happening with civilians. Now, unfortunately, and I have to be honest here, the Ukrainian authorities have really dropped the ball. There are, in Kiev, for instance, supermarkets are starting to run out of supplies. You can't really drive. A lot of people can't drive out of Kiev because there's huge shortages of fuel. For whatever reason, the Ukrainian government had like months and months and months to prepare for a possible invasion. There's no food stockpiles. There's no blanket stockpiles. There's no water stockpiles. None of the stuff has been stockpiled. Now they're trying to desperately get, supplies into Kiev via trains and buses and stuff. It's really not going well. And this is one of the things that I think is one of the biggest problems is, a lot of civilians, probably they're not going to be, the very, very unlucky ones, and it's very, very tragic, are going to be killed by Russian artillery or rockets or airstrikes. But there are a lot of people who are literally just holed up in their apartments, holed up in bomb shelters, just starving effectively. When I spent I spent 3 nights in a bunker in Kiev, in a bomb shelter in a metro station, and no one down there had any supplies other than what they carried down there. Those supplies are really, really running low.
With that, is there anything that like the rest of the world can do? I mean, is there ways that is like the Red Cross working in the area at the moment? Can we get in, or is that not possible in an active war zone?
So, I mean, the Red Cross work in pretty much everywhere that isn't, they work a lot of places, but we haven't seen a very big NGO presence, to be honest. Like, we've seen a couple of Red Cross tents. I haven't seen it. To my knowledge, I can't even remember seeing any like United Nations buildings or workers or anything like that. So yeah, there's a small Red Cross presence. There are a couple of like Ukrainian NGOs who are doing very, very good work here. I'm trying to remember the name. Is Caritas or something? Is Caritas? I'm pretty sure. There's a Ukrainian NGO that they've been providing, food and shelter and to refugees. But honestly, a lot of it's been done by like local volunteers on the ground and stuff.
Right.
We're seeing a very coordinated effort.
I was wondering as well. There is some criticism of the Western media right now, kind of going, "Oh my goodness, all these people are in the war. There's a war going on. All these people are being impacted by the war." And some of the criticism is, yeah, this has been happening every single day of our lives for the last 100 years. But there seems to be a group within the media, or certainly a commentary within the media, that is, there's even been things said like, "They look like me. I never thought this would happen. They've got blonde hair and blue eyes." Is there any feeling of that in the Ukraine? Is within Ukraine, are people seeing the response by the Western media, and what are they thinking of it? Because some are saying basically that there is a racist response because they've ignored all the brown wars, and they're very surprised that there's a war happening in a part of the world that they recognize.
Okay, so that's a very, very interesting question, a good point, and it takes a while to unpack. Well, first, for the Ukrainian response, look, the Ukrainians are not thinking about anything outside of Ukraine at the moment, or where they can get to safety. They're entirely concentrated on fighting, what for them is effectively an existential war. Yeah, it's true that there is a lot of carnage that has happened in a lot of the world, and honestly, I do think there are people who see Ukraine and they think, oh, they look like us, therefore they're more important, and they haven't cared about wars that have gone on in other parts of the world. And that is very, very shocking and very, very sad. There's also another couple of other factors, one of which is that, yes, for instance, in Syria you had a civil war, you had rebels against the government, and yes, it was very brutal. This is a state-on-state war. State-on-state wars are a much, much, much higher level of destruction per day or per capita, just because you have both sides have the entire power at state arsenals. So the images are much more shocking. There's a lot, the weapons used are like overwhelmingly destructive. And it's these kind of, there has been no war where we've seen literal dogfights over Kiev in the way that, that hasn't really happened since the Second World War. That said, yes, for instance, like how many people know that, recently Saudi Arabia carried out a massive bombing raid on Yemen? Like basically no one. It's been ignored. Part of it also is access. It's harder to get access to some of these places than it is to Ukraine, which most journalists can enter for referees. There are a lot of reasons, and some of them are some of them are valid. Some of them just come down to sort of the nature of the conflict and the nature of the access that we have.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I'm trying to be sort of generous by going, maybe this is the wake-up call for some people who have ignored all that in the past, but equally going, hey guys, we've got Mukti Azamundi coming on tomorrow who's got a doctorate in racism, basically. And I want to say, you've got people saying, these people were living in these cities their whole lives, and now their cities have been bombed about the Ukraine, but I kind of want to go, Baghdad, Senegal, these places that it's exactly the same scenario, that they've lived in those cities all their lives and there's war going on, but they haven't quite acknowledged it. So I want to give them credit for saying, good on you for coming on board now, but also but you do realize this has been happening for every day of our lives forever. These wars have been going on around the world. But look, I know that George has got a question before we let you go, Tom,
Yeah.
so we'll go to George.
Tom, yesterday we were talking about paramilitaries in Ukraine, part of Ukrainian military and also part of the Russian military. And you, as someone who's been in the Ukraine since before this latest conflict, maybe you can confirm for us, like, the place that a group like the Azov Battalion have in the Ukrainian military and indeed Ukrainian politics.
Right. Yeah. So this is again a question that takes quite a long time to unpack. So what you really to understand. So obviously the Azov Battalion, for people who aren't aware, is basically this battalion that's got it's a paramilitary organization, and it's renowned for having a lot of commanders who had quite strong far right links. Some of them were, there was a small handful that were like avowed neo-Nazis. And they were pretty brutal people. I've met a number of them, and most of them just act like normal former soldiers. But so here's the thing: is that when the war first broke out in 2014, the smaller war, over Donbass and over Crimea, the Ukrainian army was in a complete state of disrepair. It had barely any. It could, I think, about 10,000 service people under arms that it could pull together if it really could. If it really needed to. And for that reason, it was basically just getting smashed up. So it had to turn to a lot of these kind of paramilitary organizations, had to sort of hold, everyone had to hold their nose and allow them to do the fighting, because actually they were quite well trained, had quite good weaponry and quite good equipment. Now, that said, the Ukrainian army has developed significantly since then. It's kind of brought a lot of these paramilitary organizations under their under its kind of radar, but it's stripped the kind of the radical, the far right elements out of them. Should also remember that this is for sure. There's crazy far right people here. There's crazy far right people in every country. This is a country that elected a Jewish president with nearly 75% of the vote, right? And and yes, that they did play a role in the first war, that can't be denied. But this is, I would say, their role in this war is no real different to the vast majority of the Ukrainian population that's taking up arms, that's joining volunteer militias. There really isn't much of a kind of a radical element, I think, that's that big a force in Ukrainian society and politics anymore.
Hey, Tom, obviously the two biggest stories in the world at the moment is Ukraine, and on a second level at the moment is what's happening with COVID. I just actually thought yesterday, what if these two things have mixed? I mean, COVID, especially what's happening at the moment with Omicron, is incredibly infectious. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees flooding out of Ukraine. Are you seeing, is there a concern in Ukraine that there's also, on top of this, now going to be a massive COVID spike?
I'm going to be honest, no one cares.
No
one cares at all. That's as simple as that. No one's mentioned COVID to me at all. Because I mean, COVID, how deadly it can be. The Ukrainian people see this as an existential threat, something that could destroy the entire country, and just not a consideration.
Hey, look, it's been fantastic for you to join us again. Thank you so much. I did wanted to ask you. You still got, obviously you're a Kiwi, but you've done, as you told us on Monday, kind of like tours of duty, so to speak, in many dangerous regions. Have you got whānau still in New Zealand, and you keep in contact with them? How do they feel about where you are and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think my parents had to choose a job for me. Would put war correspondent at the very top of their list. But yeah, I talk to them. I make sure I keep in touch as much as I can. I mean, no one's sleeping much here, so I've got the time to do it.
All right, Tom Mutch. And hey, people want to follow you. Twitter is a really good way. Let me just say, I'm addicted to your Twitter. I've belled you. So literally every time you send out a tweet, it pops up on the front of my phone. And I just think it's a really good way for people who want to be informed with Ukraine as to how they can be informed with Ukraine. So thank you from me. Thank you for the work you're doing there. Stay super, super safe. And cheers for joining us again.
Cheers. Enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Mike's on. That's always got to be the thing we remember, Georgie boy. All right, so there you go. That is from Ukraine, Tom Mutch. That will be a clip that we put out later on today. So if you are someone who wants to share that around, some interesting and good information he put out there, that will be available to people. We're going to keep moving because it's 10 minutes to midday. We normally go for about an hour. We do want to touch on Biden for a little bit as well. So maybe what we'll do, George, I'll mention this briefly, but we won't go into it right now. Then I'll throw to you to cover off. There is a really interesting conversation to be had about how people are pushing back in Ukraine. And the story that people have seen. What I'm doing is I'm earmarking this for tomorrow, okay? About a Ukrainian singer, Maria Burmaka, saying to Putin, "Fuck you," on a BBC show this morning. It's kind of going around the world. It's kind of a bit weird that the story is going around the world because she said a sweary word on a television show, as opposed to, you know, the reality of Ukrainian people fighting back verbally and physically against Putin. But I've actually been in contact with Maria as we live streamed this. She's in a bunker. She's still in Kiev. So people have fled Kiev for their safety. She stayed in Kiev. Maybe what I'll do is I'll play this first thing. So one of the things Maria is doing is this is her in her apartment in Kiev, and she's actually blasting the national anthem through Kiev like this. Ooh, that's decided to go elsewhere. All right. Like this. And one of the things that's really interesting to see is that other people, and we talked yesterday about this being like a war of TikTok. This is someone else, somewhere else in the city, hearing it being blasted out. So there's all these other stories to tell as well about people, you know, quote unquote, fighting back the way they can. She's obviously an artist. She's a singer. She's stayed in a dangerous region. I was talking to her this morning across Facebook Messenger. She said she would like to come on tomorrow. And so hopefully she'll be back tomorrow, and we'll get into the story about her fuck you to Putin tomorrow. So we'll earmark that one because we're not too far off midday. And George, we're going to throw to you to have a chat about the State of the Union with Joe Biden.
Yeah, so doing his normal sort of thing. Being, as Pat said off here to me, it seems like a president doing a State of the Union, right? It wasn't too out of it like Trump, although there was a great little clip of Biden. You know, the point was made that there's no masks in there.
Yeah,
you know,
it looks like a normal State of the Union.
Yeah, except for behavior like this that Biden's very good at.
They're rubbing foreheads.
Yeah, he's headbutting people.
He's an odd sausage, isn't he?
He is. He is very odd. There was a bunch of things that we can talk about in the future, including
Tonight,
this here.
I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States.
This question of sanctions, obviously, but you heard Biden there talking about oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, and in the future, definitely a point I think we want to get to in the future is the sort of, and this was actually sort of brought up in the comments as well, the UK's relationship with Russian oligarchs and sort of Russia's economic place in the world, and how global capitalism sort of enables a war like this. Nonetheless, I think what we should end on is some American domestic stuff here, and this clip here is Biden basically taking us, telling the country where he stands on what Americans have been dealing with in terms of police brutality and the debate around that.
I recently visited New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Mora was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them that we were forever in debt for their sacrifices and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety of every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works. Investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
Yeah, so really kind of putting a stake in the sand, or however that phrase goes, and saying we need to fund the police rather than defund them, obviously, in response to the years of campaigning the defund police movement. And starting off with an anecdote about a recent killing of a police officer in New York, whereas in the past we might have seen a conversation about the police from a politician starting off with the death of a black teen at the hands of a police officer or something like that. So the discourse has sort of shifted there, I think, and maybe it was a calculation for the State of the Union to sort of be pro-police and try and sort of communicate that to Middle America, and the perception that Middle America will be more pro-police. And in a way, the Democrats Biden administration well and truly distancing themselves from the left of the party in terms of the debate about the police.
I think that the left of the party made a mistake with the defund the police message. I think that they didn't make a mistake with the concept behind it, because anyone who took 2 minutes to look into it, what they were saying was reallocate some of the funds from the police so that maybe when the police come across a schizophrenic individual having an episode, there were other people that could respond, not just guys who were trained to subdue, taser, and shoot. But of course, as soon as you tag, it's got to be a bumper sticker. Most people don't put 2 minutes of research into it, and they say defund the police. And like George, you and I were talking about before we came on, if I said to any one person out there, oh, we're going to defund your local primary school, we would think that means take all their money away. So actually, from someone who does a little bit of marketing and works with businesses, the messaging behind defund the police, the message of it was terrible. And if the Republicans can spin it that easily, then you haven't got your positioning statement, for want of a better word, accurate and correct. I mean, I think to say reallocating funds to make sure there is a broader aspect of people that can respond in an emergency is perfectly acceptable to most people. I think someone else saying they basically want the police to have no money is not acceptable by basically anyone unless you're an anarchist. So hopefully what Biden's done, and he just say, I'm no apologist for Biden. I think was a terrible choice, but as was the other one. But I think that what Biden's probably done is, as you say, put a stake in the ground and say, we are not about taking money away from the police, by making it very clear that they want to fund the police some more. And yet, as someone's saying in the talk, Republicans will spin everything. But the point is, if you can spin it, you don't need to spin defund the police. As I said, change the word police for anything else, and what it means is let's take all their money away. So it's not even really a necessary spin if you've got your positioning statement so poor. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's unfortunate in terms of marketing, and I guess the optics, as someone's commented that the optics are bad, the idea is good. I think the aim was to antagonize, right? It is a radical message because there was a radical situation happening, right? People's families were and kids were getting murdered by the police. And so it was a radical response to a radical situation. But you're definitely right. From a more strategic point of view,
it's strategy.
It may be lessened.
Because looking at it from getting elected, George, it's like, I don't disagree with that. It's a radical response. I don't have a problem that it's a radical response. But 90% of voters aren't radical. So you're appealing to the 10% with a radical response rather than, and look, I'm not someone who wants to play the middle ground, but a measured response that might be broadly more appeal to more people is what is going to be important at the polls. Like, and how that works out, because you know what, if you get it wrong in your positioning, and it's one of the reasons that causes you to lose the House or the Senate or the White House, then actually you can't do anything. So it's actually, even though I don't want to play, like I want to be like have double speak or kind of be.
You don't want to do both sides.
I don't want to do both sides of them. Yeah, exactly right. But I also acknowledge that people have to be smart, especially in this day and age where not only the mainstream media can spin it through, you know, the opposition political party, but people like you and me can. You know, people like you and me, these kinds of things, these kinds of broadcasts that are happening in America have got millions of viewers. You know, and in New Zealand, we've, you know, got 2, but you know, in America, millions of viewers. So it can be spun by anybody. So what you have to do when I'm working with businesses, what I often talk to them about is future proofing, and I like to try and see problems they're having before they happen and address them before they come. Someone says to me, "We're going to use the slogan defund the police." I'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Are you wanting to send the message that you're taking all the money away from the police?" And they're going to go, "No." And I would say to them, that's the worst possible message you could put out there. Then let's figure out a way to say what you're trying to do in a bumper sticker, because it has to be in this day and age, and then that will hopefully help you at the polls rather than hurt you at the polls. And I'm not saying it to say the polls are all that matters. What I'm saying it is because that's reality. If you get booted out of office, you have no impact at all. The polls are important. The polls meaning go to the polls, not the, you know, what the polls are saying, as in to step into a polling booth. When I say polls, just for clarity.
Yeah. Demilitarize the police is a better one.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's great.
Yeah,
and that's very clear. That's very, very clear. So whatever iteration they come up with first, I often think that you want to get to about your 3rd or 4th iteration before you kind of you're clear on what you're trying to say. So I wonder if defund the police was iteration 1 of those. Let's go for it. To their detriment.
Well, yeah, it's a grassroots movement, right? This would have just been on the streets that these sorts of phrases come from, and so there's not really time to strategize.
No. I don't actually agree with you necessarily, because I think it's fine for the grassroots to do that, but it's then when the politicians pick up on it, and that's when it becomes it. So the politicians need to work the iterations out. Like the person on the street, they can say whatever they want. They're in no position to actually action that, and we've just seen it with what's happened in Wellington. End all mandates. Yeah, you can say that all you want, but if that was then picked up by a political party in the height of a COVID outbreak, let's say it was 2 years ago when we were all in agreement, as kind of Simon Bridges kind of did, actually, to his detriment. So when the political party picks up the grassroots movement, that political party needs to be more sensible and smarter about it. Grassroots can say whatever the fuck they want, because there is absolutely no way for them to affect that change, unless, of course, that grassroots movement becomes a mainstream movement.
Yeah. I wish we had more time. I'd respond to some of the comments there, plan a walk, but maybe tomorrow or in the future we can talk about some of those.
Do you want to grab any of them up? We can grab a couple of them up if you want. I mean, I've got to go to I've got an appointment at the vet with my dog in 41 minutes, but that's only a 2-minute drive. So is there anything that you particularly want to address?
They mentioned ACAB, all cops are bastards.
All cops are bastards, yeah.
I like this phrase because it sort of does speak to a sort of structural problem, right? And this is the anarchist in me. It speaks literally all. If we think of the police as like as bastards, right? As people that like will not be able to respond to, as we said before, the schizophrenic on the street, who they can only meet with policing, right? They can only meet them with arrest or this is how they're trained, right? They can meet by restraining them. Then yes, structurally all cops are bastards. As for optics, yeah, obviously people aren't going to understand what I mean when I say that all cops are bastards.
I think they're both, for optics, they're both terrible because I think that I've got teenagers in my life that, you know, I've got that written on their bags and stuff, ACAB, and I just go, why do you say that? And they go, well, we don't mean all cops, obviously, because I'm like, oh, so, you know, so if, it's that black swan theory, and Planet Walk will know plenty about that, being a flat earth debunker. It's that so therefore, if I can get you a couple of cops that aren't bastards, then it's mute. That I've disproved it, sort of thing. And they're like, it's not kind of how it's used, Dad. It's not what we're talking about. So I think they're both pretty poor optics, but I think probably the all cops are bastards certainly is the grassroots movement, which makes it sort of less impacting because there's no political parties that have picked up on that. The defund the police probably has done worse, politically speaking, because it did get picked up by political figures. So therefore it had potentially more sway, had more of a reach. Like if you probably said to 100 people in the street, what does ACAB mean? Probably 70, 80, 90% of them wouldn't know. Whereas if you said defund the police, I would suspect 100 of them would know. So I think optics wise, defund the police has done more harm for what they were trying to achieve. And ACAB is not necessarily as mainstream. So the optics for it haven't been as widely spread. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anywho, yeah, we better get a move on, George.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. As we said earlier, and thanks for you who have been watching and participating as well. We appreciate that. You know what our hashtag is here? It's share our shit. That Tom Mutch clip will be up probably after my visit to the vet, to be honest. But if you see it, log into our YouTube channel. Have I still got you up there? No, I'll just remove your thing there. If you log into our YouTube channel, DOCNZ Studios, it's our studio page that carries several different sort of shows, this being one of them, Department of Conversation podcast being another one. We do some other bits and pieces as well, and we're going to add more shows to that studio page as well. Then if you can subscribe to that channel if you're watching, then you will get all the times when we go live, and you will get when the clips and stuff come out as well, which are much more shareable on your Twitter and Instagram and various other bits as well. So yeah, the way you can support us right now is to share our shit. We look forward to you doing that. We look forward to being back with tomorrow. I think we've got academic Maktis Azamande on with us tomorrow, who is sort of an expert in racism. And so we will be having a look some more at what's going on in and through the Ukraine, the response to it from the West, the media out of the West. And we will hopefully, maybe also have Maria Burmacher, who is that musician we talked about earlier, who was in Kiev right now in a bunker, but she's keen to come and have a chat with us about, you know, what's going on with her life. And I promised her, because the BBC were all very when she said fuck you, I just do you can come on our show and say fuck you to Putin as much as you want, as many times as you like, uninterrupted. So that'll hopefully be happening tomorrow. But all right, we got to fly. Hey, thanks guys for joining us. Thanks George, love your work. And we will see you tomorrow live from 11 New Zealand time, and check out the clips on the YouTube channel. All right team, see you later. Bye.
See you.